I'm here talking to Tessa Khan, and we're here at the celebration of the court which just decided to uphold the case against the Dutch government. Tessa, what is the importance of this case internationally?
Well, it's hugely important because this is a Supreme Court decision, which means that the government cannot appeal the ruling of the Supreme Court, so it is a protected precedent now. And what's particularly significant is that this is the first case in the world in which a court has ordered a national government to significantly reduce the greenhouse gas emissions from a country. And the basis on which the court has done that today is the human rights obligations of the Dutch government, which are articulated in the European Convention on Human Rights. And this is particularly important for countries and lawyers and activists around the world because the European Convention on Human Rights is a convention that every government in the Council of Europe has signed up to. So those rights apply equally to citizens of all of those countries. But human rights in general feature in the constitutions and legal systems of most countries in the world.
Yeah, so let's unpack that. So you're saying this is based on European law. So this case applies to all the European government that 25% is sort of the minimum everybody agreed to, and they have to uphold that law.
Not exactly, in that the particular way that the case was decided here was on the basis of human rights law that's common to all of those countries, but it was also decided in light of international legal principles and also the state of climate science right now. So it's also only relevant to what governments need to do in 2020. So that's, of course, next year. And so the order of the court in this instance wouldn't apply to, for example, a case that was brought in 2021.
No, but it is a precedent which people can use. So is it only how much does this apply to European and how much of the European law applies to other countries?
Well, I mean, this interpretation of the European Convention on Human Rights applies to the way the European Convention on Human Rights should be interpreted, in our view, by every national court in Europe. And the content of the rights in the European Convention are very similar. So the rights in question are the right to life and the right to a family life. And there are very similar rights to those two things.
How general can you get?
Exactly. And, so the rights to life, the rights to housing, those are protected under constitutions in a lot of different countries outside of Europe, as well as within Europe. So that's what makes this so significant and potentially transferable to cases that were brought against other national governments.
Yeah. In 2015, when this case came about, it already got a lot of international stir, right? I mean, you're part of the Climate Coalition, or what's the name of it?
The Climate Litigation Network.
Yeah. And it basically was helping Urgenda to help other countries to do that. How many cases are brought in this similar matter? I know Belgium, but there's a lot of other cases, right?
Yeah, that's right. So there's about 12 or 13 cases currently unfolding against national governments around the world, and that's in almost every region in the world. So there are several cases in Europe, there's a case in the US, a case in Canada, cases in Latin America, a case in India. So it's really inspired action all over the world. Yeah.
We got a summary in English from the judge. Could you explain in layman terms what the case is and what the court has basically decided?
Yeah, certainly. So basically the court decided that in order for the Dutch government to protect the human rights of Dutch citizens, it has to take a minimum level of action to mitigate the risks associated with climate change. And because of the particular international and scientific principles that I mentioned, the right level of action that the court determined in this instance was a 25% reduction compared to 1990 levels of greenhouse gas emissions that the government has to achieve by the end of 2020.
Yeah. And that is also because of Paris, and because they also themselves said that 25% is the minimum, and they made that a goal for themselves. That helped to make the case more clear, right?
Yeah, so all sort of developed countries or rich countries have, at various points in the last decade, under the international climate negotiations, accepted the particular responsibility of those countries to take the lead in reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and they have accepted the scientific basis for the notion that developed countries have to reduce their emissions by 25% by 2020.
And this court has said you cannot sign all kinds of treaties, mention all kinds of things, promise everything, and then not do anything. home. That is not acceptable anymore, which was the normal way that politicians says. In Paris, we sign everything and then we don't do anything at home.
Yeah, I mean, I think the court is really affirmation that what you do at the international level matters. You can't just make promises and then completely ignore them when you come back to your national government and national constituencies. So yeah, it absolutely is an attempt, I think, to hold governments accountable for all of the promises that they've made to us that they've broken. And
just for the viewers at home, if we do this 25% reduction next year, which we have to do another 14, about 5% extra, 14 megaton, then we're still under the average of the Dutch, of the European reduction, because European-wide, there's a 27% reduction in 2020, and we are now at 21%. So we are still, if we do 25%, we're under the average of the European. So it's not an extreme measurement.
No, not by any stretch. There are lots of arguments, moral arguments in particular, that the Dutch government should be doing significantly more, given its historical responsibility for contributing to climate change, given the per capita emissions of Dutch citizens compared to citizens in other parts of the world. So yeah, absolutely, there are very good political and moral arguments that the government should be doing.
We Dutch are pretty dirty in Europe, huh?
Well, yeah, I guess so. I mean, I think that's what this ruling really confirms, is that the government should be doing much more than it is.
What happens next?
Well, as I said, this is the end of the road for this case. So there is
for the Dutch.
Yeah,
for the Dutch.
That's right. Yes, there's no further avenue for appealing. And given what an important precedent it has set internationally for the reasons that we've discussed, I think we can expect that there will be cases brought along similar lines that are used to hold national governments around the world accountable for similar levels of inaction and for not taking responsibility for the climate crisis.
So the conclusion of this all is we're extremely dirty, but we have a very progressive court.
Well, I think the court just decided to apply the law as it is. So you have some very courageous lawyers and activists who brought this case, but the court, I think, just interpreted the law as it stands.
Thank you very much, Tessa.
My pleasure.